Welcome to Boswell Book Company's virtual event series. It is day 4,543 of us being in business, and we are honored to present a thrilling Milwaukee event featuring Annalie Huber in conversation with Erica Ruth Neubauer. Annalie Huber is the Daphne Award-winning author of the Lady Darby Mysteries and the Verity Kent Mysteries. She's a graduate of Lipscomb University and a member of Mystery Writers of America, the Historical Novel Society, Romance Writers of America, and the International Thriller Writers. Her new book has been winning raves from folks, critics, and lay folk alike around the country. Publishers Weekly called Murder Most Fair a treat for World War I buffs, and the legion of fans who've grown fond of Verity. Tonight, she is talking to Erica Ruth Neubauer, the author of Murder at Wedgefield Manor and Murder at the Mina House, whose writing has appeared in Los Angeles Review of Books and Mystery Scene, also a member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime. I am very excited to say that I was doing research and I can now update our bio by saying both author and conversation partner have new books that have just been released to booksellers to order. We are so excited to mention Annalie Huber's next book is A Perilous Perspective, coming out April 5th, 2022. It's a new series from Berkeley. I will be sending out to pre-order that book. And Erica Ruth Neubauer's third book is Danger on the Atlantic, and it is coming out March 29th, 2022. So I'm suspecting if all things go well, you might be interviewing each other. What an honor for both of you. I can't decide who to have the bigger honor. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Wait, is that a new series? Are you starting?
No, it's actually
I was like,
book 10. Yeah, number 10 in the Lady Darby series. So
okay. Whew.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh goodness gracious.
Wow. I already have questions about how you're doing 2 series a year, but we'll get to that. So this book is the latest in the Verity Kent series, the one that we're discussing today. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Sure, about the book.
Yes.
So the Verity Kent series is set in post-World War I, mostly England. And Verity was a spy for the British Secret Service during the war. And so a lot of the series is kind of some extending adventures of mysteries carried over from the war. It also deals with the aftermath of the war and how it has affected people in all various different ways. And in the 5th book, Verity, because she was a spy and she could not share because of the Secret Act with anyone what she was doing, one of her brothers passed away early in the war, and because she needed to keep going, she stuffed that grief down and didn't deal with it, just like a lot of people did. And in the 5th book, she's finally going home for the first time almost in 5 years, and having to deal with the rest of her family members who don't understand. They think that she's pretty much abandoned them, and so there's a lot of emotions that have not been dealt with. And also her great aunt, who is from Germany, shows up at her door on her doorstep unexpectedly. And in Germany, at the end of the war and after the war, it was absolutely a mess because of the blockade. There was rampant starvation. So many people died from lack of food, and the Spanish influenza and they lost more soldiers than. The only country that lost more soldiers than Germany was Russia. So, they had even more casualties that way. So it's a complete mess. And so her German great aunt is not in a good place. And she shows up on her doorstep with a new maid. Her older maid had died from the influenza. And so they decide to go back to her family in Yorkshire earlier than planned because of the anti-German sentiment that's really rampant at that time, especially in London. So they return home, and her German maid is murdered, and Verity has to figure out whether something from the war has followed them to Yorkshire, or whether one of her neighbors who she trusted has taken out their hatred of the Germans on this maid.
Yes.
The brief synopsis anyway.
I thought you did such a fantastic job with not only you do a really good job with everybody's PTSD, both her husband Sydney and Verity, both dealing with their PTSD and then like their relationship around that. But also, I really loved the tensions in the family in this book, and the grief. I think you really nailed all of that. It really, really hit home. And like you said, you focused on the German great aunt who came over. What made you decide? I thought you did a great job talking about the hostilities that were still like rampant and with good reason, but I think you really humanized both sides. So what made you decide to make that the focus of this book?
So I have several different memoirs that I've read that I've gotten lots of great research from. And one of them is Captain Henry Landau, who was the head of, he was part of British intelligence in Rotterdam, Holland during the war, and he ran the intelligence gathering networks that were at work inside Belgium and northern France, the German occupied areas. And when I was reading his memoir, I stumbled across this real German soldier that towards the end of the war, there was a lot of German deserters that were escaping over the border into Holland because the situation was so bad. And they would pull them off the street, and for a few guilders, they would interview them and get all their whatever information they could. And there was one soldier that he felt really empathized with because he really believed the man. He was disillusioned with Germany and the Kaiser. He had gone home on his last leave, and his family was surviving on potatoes and turnips. I mean, it was just, they were in a really bad way. And so he had decided that when he got back to the front, he was going to desert as soon as he could, because he felt he had more of a responsibility for his family than to the Kaiser. And so he thought, if I go to Holland, I can make some money and send it back to my family for them to feed themselves. And so he ended up hiring this German soldier and convincing him to go into Germany. They gave him the documents and all this stuff to do it, to pass off as a, invalided soldier and to gather this information. And he returned with it. And then they gave him another task to do. And then he disappeared, and they never knew whether he was caught or whether he just decided that once he realized those documents worked and they passed the test, that he just took off with the money and went home. And I thought, how fascinating. And Landau didn't even really blame the man. I mean, he thought he actually said, how could we expect him to be loyal to us, instead over his family when he wasn't even going to be loyal to his own country, So that man just really intrigued me, and I wanted to know. I mean, I don't think we'll ever know what really happened to him, but I thought, here's a perfect jumping point for a story. And so using him, and using the fact that she had a German great aunt and that lived near the border with Belgium, it just kind of, worked out. And I just thought this would be a great time to talk about, to be able to highlight both sides, because Verity, in one of her strengths is that she's very often in the middle and can understand both sides of an issue. Like, she understands why so many in Britain hate the Germans, and but she also understands that the Germans aren't all bad. I mean, they're in a bad situation too. They're not really the enemy. And, just like she was a spy, so she understands what was going on closer to the front and what the soldiers were experiencing, but she was also in the home front. She understands what people back home were experiencing. So it was just another way to be able to share that dichotomy and to really kind of dive into that.
Nice. I kind of mentioned the relationship between Verity and her husband. It's a lot about rebuilding their marriage after the war, which I think was probably a hugely common issue for men and women at the time. Why did you kind of make this decision instead of more of a traditional romance?
Yeah, so with my Lady Darby series, it's definitely more traditional. They meet in the first book and it's exploring from there on. And I just thought, I really want to do something different. And I thought, there were so many people that were war brides. They married right at the beginning of the war, and then they were separated for 4.5 years or 4 years, 3.5 years, whatever it was that they joined up. And the experiences that they both experienced, they really returned different people. And I mean, how do you move forward from that? How do you rebuild a marriage when you're both so different? Your experiences have been so different. And especially with Verity, she wasn't just home. She was, spying too. So she has her own secrets, And so, that was a great conflict to have to deal with and just really just explore. It gives them a lot of emotional resonance and, a lot to work with. So for me, I was excited. It was a real challenge because to be realistic, they can't just get back together and it's all great. It's not, that's just not how life works. And so it's been it's been a challenge, but it's been really rewarding to get to explore that.
Yeah, I really have liked watching them kind of rebuild as they've gone along.
I know it's funny because there's some other characters and in the first early books, there's some people that really would rather Verity ditched her husband and go with this other guy. And
there was some good options.
Yeah, I know. And I didn't want to make it, the easy way out would have been to make the other guy end up being a villain. But that's easy, that's not realistic. I mean, he is a good guy, so it really ups the conflict and the tension when, there is other options, but she's making the choice. I'm going to try to make this work. And so we see what happens and how it goes.
Yeah. Why did you decide to do this after the war instead of, because there's still a lot of espionage that you're pulling in, but it's all post-war. Why did you decide to do post-war instead of just straight up espionage during the war?
Right. So for me, with my mystery series, they always have a strong romantic subplot. I'm naturally drawn to that. And when you're writing a series during a war, everything comes second to that war. I mean, it is the main character of the story. And so it's really hard to do a romance or any real relationships other than war relationships. And so I thought, okay, if I set this after the war, I can still use the war. I can still have flashbacks. I can still use her skills and show her using her skills because, the espionage didn't end with the war. So, and also be able to have them be together and explore that romantic element and how to work all that out. And so for me, that was the key choice. It was really because of the relationships.
Nice. That all makes perfect sense. And I agree. I'm drawn to historicals that have a romantic subplot. I like them.
It's my jam. I just do. I mean, I know it doesn't work for everybody, but I love it. So
yeah, same. I love to read them. I love to write them. So that's my jam. Do you have a favorite scene from this book? Either was there something that you really, really enjoyed writing, or afterwards you were like, that one was awesome?
I have to say writing this book was really hard. I had a really difficult time because it was within the COVID, everybody struggled. But for some reason later in the year last year, I think it was just the bog down of it all. And it was the subject matter of this book because it's dealing with it's dealing with grief and all grief in different forms. And it's really a big part of the book, and especially Verity. I really struggled, and I realized later on the reason I struggled was because I was grieving myself, not necessarily for loved ones dying, but for the life we lost and that we were never going to get back, and our innocence and the way we thought people were, and we saw that they were different through all of this. And so it was cathartic for me, and also really, really hard to write some of the scenes. And I will say some of the scenes with Verity near the end, when she's finally dealing with her grief, I was sobbing when I was writing because they were so hard, but I was so glad I went there because I was really proud of the way they turned out, because I was willing to go there. And there's some scenes near the end that they're more climactic scenes, but I ended up being able to throw in some humor. And I always like that when I can find some humor. And if I'm reading back through and I actually laugh, I'm like, yay, okay, that's good.
Yeah. Yep.
If it doesn't feel forced, if I actually forgot I put that in there and then I laugh, I'm like, oh, good.
Yeah. And that makes so much sense. The grief comes through so strong. I think you really handled that well for Verity.
Thank you.
Just holy cow. What did I say? So do you write two series? Do you put out 2 books a year?
I do, yes. that's what my goal has always been, to have 2 books come out have 2 series. And so I'm thrilled that I get to do that. So
it's amazing, but also like, how do you do that? Because they're both really deeply researched series, both of them. Because your other series, the Lady Darby series, is set in 1830s Scotland. And then this one, the Roar, like, holy cow, woman. Like, so what, how, first of all, how do you start researching for these?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, okay. Like for a series, like I do a ton of research before I ever start. I mean, we always have to have that background, just all the little things, just what food they ate and the clothes they wore and what general history was going on and the language they used and all that. And then for each book, once I've decided what it's going to be about, then I kind of gather up all my research. I do a ton of research on that, depending on whatever the subject is. And then I, formulate the plot. I call myself a plotzer. So I'm kind of a middle between plotter and pantser. I do a plot, but I like it to be loose. I mean, I know all the turning points and all the major things and who the suspects are and all that stuff. But especially towards the end of it, I keep it real kind of loose. I kind of know what I'm going to do, but I always find when I'm writing, I come up with way better ideas. And so I like to have that freedom to change it and to go with the flow and go with inspiration. And so like about 60 to 80% into the book, I end up usually having to then sit down because I now know better where I'm going and I kind of replot the ending and write it. And then of course go back with edits and smooth everything over and all of that good stuff. So
does your villain ever change if you do it that
yes.
way?
So I kept having my villain change. I was choosing it and then it kept changing on me. I would come up with a way better idea. And so now I don't necessarily choose who the villain is. I like set it up so it could be several different people. And then as I'm writing it, I figure it out which is the best option. So then when I go back with edits, I can kind of shift things and throw things in or whatever. Yeah.
Sprinkle them back in.
Yeah.
What made you choose 1830s Scotland for your other series?
So Lady Darby's backstory, she is not the social butterfly. She's awkward. And I wanted her to deliberately be that way because I feel like that's how I would be if I was living in that time. And there's so many great series where the heroine is really good at charming people and getting information and finding it all out that way. So I wanted to write a series where the heroine was completely different. That's not her forte. And so I was like, well, what can she bring to investigation? And I thought, well, medicine. How do I get a gentlewoman to have knowledge of medicine? And that's where this whole backstory of her late husband was an anatomist, and he was writing a definitive anatomy textbook. This is like before what we think of, like before Gray's Anatomy, the definitive one. Yeah. And so he's a miser, and he marries Kira and forces her to sketch the dissections for his book. And of course, gentlewomen, they didn't even attend funerals. I mean, so the fact she's been around a dead body that's been cut open, it's just this huge scandal. And so it really gave her a traumatic element to start her off with. And I chose 1830 because by choosing this backstory, this is the era of the body snatchers and the anatomy schools, and Burke and Hare is 1829. The men in Edinburgh who were killing people off the street and selling them to anatomists. So there's all this fear around it. And it's a couple of years before they finally changed the law. And so it was just the perfect era to really set it, to the height of that panic. And there's also so much other good political turmoil right then. I mean, there's so many changes in the laws that are happening. So there's lots of good, juicy stuff to work with. And also, there wasn't a lot of people writing then. I mean, there was lots of series before it and lots of series later in Victorian times, but that William IV reign, nobody was really doing. So I was like, I'm going to make it mine.
Yeah. That whole Burke and Hare thing is super fun.
I know a lot of people are really, it's just fascinating. I mean, we're all fascinated by things like that.
Yeah. Where do you get most of your research? Do you just read a lot of nonfiction, or are you finding like resources elsewhere?
Yeah, so I read a lot of like general nonfiction about whether it's a social history or a military history or those kind of things. And that kind of gives me ideas for other, I love, my favorite resource is to go to the back of books and look at their bibliography, because it always gives me other books I never would have found. Like Captain Henry Landau's memoir, I never would have found it if I hadn't found it in the back of a bibliography. Somebody else had used it for their research. So that's where I find the good stuff. And then reading those memoirs, I mean, like soldiers' memoirs, officers' memoirs from the war, you know, things like that, or just diaries and journals of a society matron, you know, in either era, and letters. And those are always great too, for like great slang and how they phrase things. And like, you know, I always say like 1919, 1920s, there's such a rhythm to the language. I mean, and you really can't, and you know this, I mean, you write in this era, like you can't catch it unless you are, you know, reading or watching, there's films in that era, you know, I mean, things like that to really get it. So.
Yep. Yep. You kind of have to immerse yourself before you jump into it.
Right, right.
You have a hard time separating between the two, especially as you're writing both of them in a year. Do you have a hard time separating between the two, or because they're set so many years apart, is it easier for you?
I've never had trouble. I think, I mean, they're only 90 years apart, but there's such a difference. I mean, there's the eras are so different, even though they're not that far apart, in the way they spoke and acted, and the, you know, even the morals and things. And so I can always, I know whose voice I'm talking in, you know, like Verity's is very distinctive to me versus Kira's. So I've never had issues. I mean, every once in a while, I think the only instance I can think of, and it's not even the voice, it's that I was writing a Verity story and I got in several chapters on, and then I realized, oh wait, they do fingerprinting at this point. So I had to back up because I totally forgot, like, okay, they can do fingerprinting in 1919, you know? So I had to back up a couple scenes and adjust it a little bit because I had forgotten that. So, and they would have at this point in the way it was written. So, yeah, that's the only thing I can think of. And that wasn't really a voice. It was just me forgetting, in this era, they have different technology.
Right. That's really fun that you get to do investigations in two different ways based on like how, and it would have been so different, like how things were done.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's fun too, because I mean, like sometimes I'll come up with a plot and I'll be like, okay, this would work in this era, but it won't work in this era, or, you know, so I can
right,
kind of fine tune it.
Is there anything super fun that you learned for this book that you did not get to put in? Because I always learn something super interesting that I don't get to, that you just sort of like, I can't use that.
Oh my goodness, I know
Dump
there's
that somewhere, but
yeah, I like so many of the memoirs. I wish I could use like all these spy incidents. I mean, there's so many of them that like if you wrote about it in a story, nobody would believe them. You know, I mean, like,
yeah.
Oh my goodness, I'm trying to think. So there's this one incident where there was two young girls and they like traveled cross country over the border from Belgium into France to try to set up part of the courier network for this information. And they started chatting up German soldiers and actually caught a ride with these German officers. Like, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, can you imagine being 17 years old and, you know, if you're caught, you're like,
right?
you're going to be either executed or sent to prison in Germany. And they just had to call, I mean, because they totally, you know, oh, these women aren't up to anything. They're these 17-year-old women. They're like, there's no way, you know,
Exactly.
they took advantage of that and just, you know, and I'm like, wow, like,
That's
wow.
ballsy.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
I read that and I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's crazy. Oh, the story that you told me right before we came on, because right before we came on, we were discussing things that maybe are anachronistic or whatever, but I thought it was so interesting that the word you said that you can't use in the 1830s was
siblings. Like we were talking about how, like, I mean, like we all, historical writers, we all use etymological dictionaries all the time. I mean, with phrases and all these words, we're trying to catch ourselves, but it is really hard sometimes because there are words that really just don't sound too modern. They seem like they've been around a lot longer and you don't even catch yourself to even go look for it. And sibling was one of the ones that I was like, oh my gosh, I would have thought it was at least 300 years old, but it's not, you know? So yeah, it's crazy. So every once in a while we'll get a note from a reader and we'll be like, oh my gosh, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll never forget that, you know?
No, I'm never going to forget it either. Like this blew my mind. Sibling, like I just would never have thought to even need to look that up.
Right. So you think how many other words are out there, and you're never going to, I mean, it's impossible. So,
right.
Yeah.
So do you feel that your two protagonists are really different from each other? Did you do that purposely, or?
I did, yes. I didn't want to write a rehash of Kira,
Right.
Lady Derby, with Verity. And with the fact that she is a Secret Service agent, she was a spy. I mean, she's gotta be different. I mean, because Kira is very introverted. She's a very gifted portrait artist. She's good at observation and seeing people and seeing things that other people don't, and which, would be helpful for a spy. But I mean, she would never thrive in having to like bluff her way through things. And I mean, just the ballsiness of, being a spy in a German occupied, area and all of that. And so they definitely have different skills and different personalities. And I wanted them to be different, definitely.
Do you think they would be friends?
I do, actually. I think because at their heart, they have this empathy and willingness to try to understand other people and empathize with their life and try to understand them. And so I think that they would both, because of that, they would both come to appreciate each other if they were willing to get to know each other.
Yeah, I actually agree. What does your writing process look like? You get up in the morning, and then what do you do?
Yeah, so optimally, I have 2 young daughters. So optimally, I get up with my 2nd grader, and I get her off on the school bus, and then I get down to work, and my husband takes care of our 4-year-old and gets her off to preschool. And then I get to write until about 2:00, and then I go pick up the preschooler and then get the 7-year-old off the bus. And then I'm mommy for the afternoon and running all over the place and all of that stuff. So my optimal day is basically about 7 a.m. to 2:00, getting to actually get work done. So when that happens, it's great, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
This week has been one of those weeks that didn't happen.
Yeah. Oh, I suppose school starting and everything, and like.
Well,
chaos.
yeah, I mean, yeah, we've had some hiccups with different things, and anyway.
Sure. Do you usually have like a word goal that you set for the day? I mean, you must have to write pretty tightly to be knocking out 2 books a year.
I do. Yeah. I mean, my goal is to get 10,000 words in a week. So if I'm working really well, that's about 2,000 words a day, 5 days a week. That doesn't always happen,
Right.
but that's my goal. And so I try to be like, okay, well, I didn't get my 2,000 in, so then I got to get it in at some point else during the week. And then of course, but I always feel like I'm inevitably falling behind. So by the end, you're always like racing to get more, so that's my optimal.
Yeah. Fair. And like you said, like, I know it's been really, are you finding that it's getting easier to write as the COVID? Because I really struggled during the real meat of the pandemic to write at all.
I go through phases. I find like where I'm doing really well and I'm not having issues. And then there'll be a month or 2 where I just feel exhausted. I mean, I think it all comes in waves, and different things, you get hit with different things. I mean, I will say I've struggled since we went back to school just because of the added stress of all that. And
Right.
And all the rules were different this year. And so there's a lot of different worries. And, my kids are too little to get the vaccine yet and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, for me, it's come in waves where I'm getting a lot done. And then I have a wave where I'm not getting a lot done. So I'm just glad I have the waves of being productive.
Fair. Fair. I should have told the audience before that if you guys have questions, please put them in either the Q&A or the chat. I forgot to say that.
And questions for Erica too. We're gonna quiz you.
We're not here to talk about me. It's fine. I'm always curious when I talk to other contemporary or to other historical writers, if you would ever consider writing contemporary. Not that you have a lot of free time to be writing other things, but like,
I would like to try it someday. I mean, like I said, my schedules were tight right now, which I'm lucky, I'm blessed. I'm not going to complain. But I would love to give it a try sometime. I actually think that if I did, I would like to try to do more of like a dual timeline where there's a historical element and a contemporary element. That might be probably how I would dip my toe in if I found the right idea. So I think I would struggle though at first because I'm so used to writing in historical, and there's it's just different. The language and everything is just different. So yeah, I think it would be definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I tried briefly. That's what I wrote during the pandemic, was something that was contemporary, and I showed it to my freelance editor, and she was like, "You're still writing in a historical voice," and I was like, "That's fair. That's fair. You called me on that."
I mean, it's like people ask me, are you going to write YA or children's, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's such a different skill set. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not just, I mean, some people can do that, but like, it really is a different skill set, and not everybody has that. So I don't know if I got it in me or not.
I'm sure you do. I decided to go back and rewrite that as a historical. So that's what I'm doing. Oh, we have questions. Excellent. Do you think the historical mysteries are more difficult to write than contemporary mysteries, since we're talking about it?
I don't know that I would say that. I would say like I said, it's a different skill set for sure. And I mean, you have to be willing to really do all that research. I mean, you can't just wing it. I mean, because it's just not believable. I mean, you have to, there's so much, you have to fully immerse yourself in that you don't even think about, I mean, like I get comments that people love the food I describe, and I laugh because food is not my forte. I am not I cook because I have to, not a big foodie. And so like, I always leave like, the dinner in parentheses when I'm writing my first draft, because I just am not. And so then I'm going back and like finding, okay, what dishes would they have eaten at this time, and how can I describe it? And, and so I'm always like, yay, I fooled them. I don't know what I'm talking about, So, but it's research. I mean, that's what I'm saying. You have to know all this stuff. You can't just say, oh, they sat down and had spaghetti, So, right. Yeah. So I would say it's not necessarily harder. It's just different. It's a different skill set. It's a different, and I mean, with contemporary, I mean, depending on what you're writing, I mean, you got to really know the police procedures or the laws, or, depending on what you're getting into. So, yeah.
Yeah. I also think I just think it would be harder to set up a contemporary, even just so far as like, when we're writing, they don't have the tools and the technology, and now there's so much technology. So how do you make it interesting when you can just look everything up on Google?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You have to get creative. I mean, like, yeah, there's definitely, I mean, for our historical sleuths, I'm like, how are we going to have them figure it out when they can't, they can't fingerprint in 1830. They can't, all these different things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like those challenges.
I do too. I think it's fun.
Yeah, I do too. So Nancy Proctor, that's a great question, Nancy. Do you write both series at the same time or sequentially? So
I do not write a first draft of more than one thing at a time. Like I don't think I could do that. It would just be too hard. So I write my first draft and my edits before I turn it into my editor. I'm never jumping around, but sometimes I'll be working on another book and then I'll get copy edits or proofreads or whatever for the previous book. Yeah. So it just depends on the publisher's schedule versus what my schedule is. So, but yeah, I'm never drafting a new book at the same time. I don't know. I'm sure there's an author who does it, but I don't know how. I mean, I would be so, crossing wires.
Yeah, no idea. And then Nancy wants to know, will you be able to continue your Gothic mystery series at some point?
Yes, I know. I am grateful for those readers who have been asking for book 2. It has been in the works forever. The issue is that it's self-published, and I've been really lucky and blessed that I've gotten contracts for my other series that are with publishers that have deadlines, and I have to meet them. So I can't. So when something has to fall by the wayside, it's my self-published Gothic myth series. And of course we've had COVID and all this stuff come up. And so book 2, it's really close to being done. I would say it's 3/4 of the way done. And I'm really hopeful that it's going to be out next year. Yeah, finally. But I've stopped giving a date because I keep having to change it, and I feel really bad about that. So hopefully it is almost done. So hopefully after I finish, I'm working on Verity Kent book 6. And once that's turned in, I'm hoping to have enough time and enough energy to finish the Gothic Myths book 2 before I have to switch gears to Lady Darby 11. So.
Whoa. Laura wants to know, do you put characteristics of people you know in your books?
I do put like ticks and things that I've observed of people, or like, I really like this person's eyes, or yeah, even personality characteristics, but I never use a person whole. I don't know. I can't write that way. And I would feel bad, honestly. Yeah, so I don't use a person whole, but I definitely use parts of people, I guess I would say. Yeah.
That's fair. I've started stealing friends' names too, because I'm like, I'm running out of.
Yeah.
I know
I have issues because, excuse me, I come from a very big family, and my husband comes from a very big family, and all of us, and there's a lot of men and a lot of brothers, and they all have very traditional names. So I'm running out of male names to use, like, as, you know, I mean, like, I'll use like an uncle's name or something for a minor character, but I try to avoid like making them like the murderer or the
right. Right.
You know what I mean? I have had to kind of bend that rule because I'm running out of names, but unless I'm going to make all of my male characters have really wonky unique names, you know, the names that we don't know, you know, that were like Peregrine, you know. So anyway, so yeah, that's a little issue for me.
Fair. What advice or encouragement would you give to a novice writer?
Well, first of all, don't give up. The only way you will not succeed is if you give up. You just have to keep trying. I think every author has stories of, you know, rejection. I mean, there's a lot of authors that wrote for years and years and years. I wrote for 7 years, and The Anatomist's Wife, my first published book, was my 5th completely finished manuscript. And I sent off all 4 other ones and got rejection after rejection, but I got better and I got better and I got better. And, you know, the only way you're going to get better is if you just keep trying and keep writing. I mean, you just have to write to really figure it, and read what you want to write, because, you know, you can't, you will figure it out. You will figure it out as you're reading, and find your voice, and find, you know, by writing, you'll find your voice, and you'll get there. You just have to keep going.
Yep. I remember I listened to Sue Grafton once give a talk, and she said that she had 8 books in the drawer before she got A's for Alibi published. And that was hugely inspiring, because if Sue Grafton had to write 8 books before she got published.
I mean, there's way more stories of authors who wrote for a long time and had a lot of rejection than those authors that like sold their first manuscript. And there are authors that did that, and that's great for them. But don't give up. If that's not you, don't give up, because most authors have gone through the process, have gone through the ringer.
And I agree. I think reading is the best education, and reading what you want to write is the best education you can give yourself. Read all of it.
Right. Exactly.
You'll absorb it. Laura wants to know, why did you choose to self-publish a book?
So I tried to actually sell the first Gothic Myths book, Secrets in the Mist, is what it's called. And they weren't, so one of the issues with publishing, traditional publishing, is that they have certain books that they decided work and that they sell. And if you write a book that's kind of outside one of those genres, then maybe they like it, but they just don't know how to market it. And so they'll turn it down. They won't offer a contract. So Secrets of the Mist did not sell because it was a Gothic, and they were convinced there wasn't a market for it, which I disagree. I think Gothics are really having a comeback. I think a lot of the domestic thrillers are more Gothics. They just happen to be contemporary. So, so I decided, you know, it's done. I'm really proud of this book. All of these people that turned it down said they loved the book. They just didn't know how to market it. So then I'm going to publish it. I mean, why would I let it sit in the drawer when I can still publish it myself? So it was a fun experiment, and I actually kind of enjoyed it. So that's why I'm keeping going. That's why I'm finishing book 2. And it's a little bit of it's a departure from my straight historical mysteries. And I adore Gothics. They're some of my favorite books, Mary Stewart is my favorite author of all time. Her romantic suspense books, they're Gothic in tone. They're brilliant. And Victoria Holt and all of those kind of authors, I just love them. And so it's just kind of a fun thing for me to get to do. And I get to do what I want. I don't have to worry about what a publisher says. So it's just kind of a fun side thing to get to do.
That's awesome. I also really love Gothic.
They're awesome. They're just fun. I mean, that eerie atmosphere, and I just eat it up. It's good.
I have, like, when I talk to a lot of authors, a lot of people aren't able to read fiction when they're writing fiction, which would be really hard for you, since you're always writing fiction. So are you able to read while you're writing?
Yes, I do. The only caveat for me is that I try not to read a book that's set in the era that I'm writing in. So within a couple decades, just because I don't want to fall out of my voice. It can kind of influence you a little bit. So, but yeah, I can totally read, different eras that are far enough away from whatever I'm writing. But yeah, I mean, otherwise I wouldn't ever get to read fiction. So yeah, I definitely can. So yeah.
So are you reading anything good right now?
Let's see. I just finished several, actually just finished several books that I read for endorsement. So I can give you heads up about some stuff that's coming up. Down a Dark River by Karen Oden. It's coming out later this year. It's really good. It's the first in a series. It's late 19th century. It's a Scotland Yard inspector. He's Irish, and I just really loved it. It's a great, the characters are just great. The character arcs and stuff are fantastic. And The Spanish Daughter, it's more of a straight historical fiction, but it does have a murder mystery and an inheritance plot and all this stuff. And it's set in Ecuador, which I loved. It was something different. It's 1920 Ecuador, with the cacao plantations and everything. And it's by Lorena Hughes, I believe. And that comes out later this year, I think, or early next. And then I just finished, oh goodness, what is it called? Twilight at Morrington Cross by Abigail Wilson. Yes. And it's a more of a historical romance. It's got a very sweet romance, and it's just fun. It's kind of got that throwback to Gothic Regency elements to it. So if you like that kind of stuff, you would really like it. So
what was the name of that? Man, I should have been writing all these down. I'm gonna come back and watch this later and write all those down.
Or just email me. Right now. Right, like, I always say this. I always, if I like a book, I rate it or review it on Goodreads and on BookBub. So if you ever want to know what I'm reading, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, because I'm an author, I don't put up the stuff I don't like. I don't think that's my place to do.
No.
Readers and reviewers, you are totally within your right to review a book you didn't like. I'm not saying that, but for me as an author, I don't do that. So, but for books that I really liked and I recommend, I always put them on Goodreads and on BookBub. And also on Goodreads, I have shelves that have my research books for each series. So if you ever want to know what books I've read for Verity Kent to do research, a lot of them are in that bookshelf. Some of them aren't because they're not on Goodreads. It's funny. Sometimes you go look for stuff and it's not there. So because it's so old or obscure. But yeah, a lot of them are on those shelves. So I always, if you want to know, just go look and you can find all of it. So
these are some hot tips for me too. I'm telling you what. I need to be doing this too. What was I gonna say? Oh, the ones that I would recommend, Diane Freeman's series.
Oh yeah,
is really good. The first one is like the Ladies Guide to they're all the Ladies Guide.
Yeah, they're all ladies. Yeah, it's like
the Ladies Guide to like
murder, or I don't know. There's yeah.
So her series is super cute. And the other one I really, really read that I really enjoyed, I think the second might be coming out hopefully later this year, was Stephen Spotswood, Fortune Favors the Dead. It's set in the 40s in New York City, and it's two women. And it had kind of a Nero Wolfe vibe to it, but two women PIs.
That's cool.
Yeah, I was really into it.
I'll have to look that up. I haven't heard of that. So yeah.
Yeah. Those were my two recommendations besides yours, which I finished, which I really love. I really love this series.
Oh, thank you.
What else? Does anybody else have any other questions? Because I have run through mine.
We've got some people chiming in saying they like certain books and stuff. That's awesome. So
It is
always
awesome.
good to give everybody recommendations. I love talking about books.
I do too.
I mean, authors are readers first, right? I mean, so
Yes.
we can always chat about books. It's
Yes.
like, you've been reading. Okay, how long you got?
Yeah, I just picked up The Hollywood Spy by Susan Elia McNeil. That's another series.
Yes,
I
it's
really liked.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I guess
I haven't read
I got to read an early copy of that earlier in the summer, so that was
lucky.
Yeah, that's a perk of being an author for sure, that we get early copies sometimes. So yeah,
It's true.
or when we go to conferences, we get books, and yeah, we always have more books than we know what to do with, right?
It's just this whole house is like just a towering stacks of books everywhere. Like I'm totally gonna get to these, you guys.
I love
Don't
it.
worry. Oh, good, Daniel. You found The Murder Under Her Skin as the follow-up. Oh, do you plan on touring soon? Are you gonna tour in person anywhere?
Probably not this year. But well, I may. Right now, I'm scheduled to be at the Indiana Holiday Author Fair in Indianapolis in December, which is always a lot of fun. It's at the Historical Society there. But that's the only in-person event that I have for this year. But hopefully next year we have our conferences and have everything again. So I'm hoping in the spring for the Lady Darby release, I'll be able to travel again. So
Fingers crossed.
That's my hope.
Do you go to
far enough out, hopefully?
Yeah, I know. I was really disappointed on all of the conferences
I know. So I'm just like, I think everybody now is just like chomping at the bit for 2022. It's like, okay, I'm going to this one and this one.
Oh yeah, I'm going to everything. I'm slightly feral now, but like I'm still gonna show up.
We're all gonna be so awkward and like not know how to have conversations in person.
Yep. Very much so. Because the conference is just like a huge group of introverts getting together and talking about books.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be great.
We all miss it. Even those of us who thought we wouldn't, we all miss it.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, would you care to join us?
Maybe. I couldn't find the one. I was like, I got all behind. I was like, wait, what was that book again? So the only one I couldn't find was the Ladies Guide one. I found it's not the romance one, the Amanda Collins thing, right?
Nope.
No.
Let me find it really quick.
Yes,
I got it.
Otherwise, for folks who are attending, if you click on any of those links or the link to Anna Huber's webpage or any other, you will, it'll pop up on another screen and you can have it when we close off the event. We'd love for you to buy it from us, of course, but buy it at whatever your favorite local bookstore is. Is there a local bookstore in Fort Wayne that you actually have signed copies or personalizations?
There isn't. I did you get the
Book plates.
Yeah, book plates.
Yes.
You have the book plates?
I'm not sure if we got them yet. Let me just look.
Oh, no.
Let me just Huber. Sorry.
There isn't a local place in Fort Wayne that has signed copies right now. We had a wonderful independent bookstore and it closed a couple years ago. So we have several used, but we don't have any new.
Yes, we do have. Yes, we have the book plate. So
yes,
if
okay,
somebody
so you
writes
get
us,
a book plate from.
Yes. Well, yes, and I'm trying to figure out. I have actually a former bookselling colleague who moved to Fort Wayne, and she had thought of opening a bookstore, but I don't think she did. Sadly.
We need
Susan,
one.
go
I mean,
show
we have
up here
Barnes and Noble, and
there.
that's basically it. So
They could still use, because she told, what was it, Mitchell Books, the really,
Yes.
really large one, right?
yes, it
So
was
big.
a wonderful store. Yeah, I was so bummed.
Maybe too big for the market. Maybe a little. I mean, wasn't it like 15,000 square feet or something?
It was huge. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
It was great, but yeah, it was for the area.
A little smaller.
Yes.
Yeah.
You could also convince, so many secondhand bookstores are selling selective new books, especially from local authors. You could definitely suggest to them to sell your book.
Okay.
And then you could drive people that, because especially now with COVID, without traveling, it's so important. Like so many people just, book plates are terrific, but people
Right.
really want the signed copy or the, I mean, Erica
Yeah.
Ruth is sending her books all over the country.
Gotcha.
That's huge, right?
Yeah, the thing I was running into was the one used bookstore, they were willing to buy like 3 copies from me, but they wouldn't buy from the publisher. And so it just became this huge headache. So I was like,
It's
well,
gotta
never
be,
mind.
yeah. More secondhand stores are like fulfilling customer requests through Ingram, so they can do stuff like that. But yeah, I could, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, the good news is both of you are distributed by Penguin Random House, so it's so easy for stores to buy direct that if they're going to buy direct from anyone, they're going to buy direct from
Right, right.
and, you know. So, anyway, that's our little lesson on opening a bookstore. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you in person someday.
Thank you.
It was an honor to have you, Erica Ruth. Always a pleasure. And
likewise, Daniel.
Always. And we also thank the folks who showed up today. And reminder to everyone, we will have a recording up within a week, and we'll send a copy out to you so you can share with friends.